Well, mainstream media journalists upping the attacks on President Trump across multiple platforms. An op-ed piece in today's Washington Post reads, quote, "Will the media's anti-Trump fever ever break? We are at a dangerous precipice," it says, in how Americans receive and digest information and ultimately form opinions. The influence of social media feeds, which through user choice or outside meddling provide only a narrow flow of information, makes the credibility of news organizations more imperative than ever. Joining us for the discussion, Emily Jashinsky, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner, and Erin Delmore, senior political correspondent for Bustle.com. That op-ed piece, Erin, from which I just read, although it appeared in the Washington Post and other papers, it comes from the heartland. Gary Abernathy is editor and publisher of the Hillsboro, Ohio Gazette. And he says when he talks to people around Hillsboro, Ohio, and they're talking about President Trump's enemies, they're not talking about Democrats. He says they're talking about the media. What do you think of that?
They're echoing a statement that's come right from the president. He's gone on the campaign trail and he said that journalists are the enemy. He said a lot of them don't love their country. It's not a fight the president's shying away from. So when we see people saying that their trust in the media is eroding, that has been proven poll after poll. Part of it is due to the way that we receive information now, so much of it coming from social media, but part of it is from what the president is saying when he holds up his presidential megaphone. He is casting an us versus them shadow, so when you hear it repeated throughout the country, it's no surprise. So
is that the reason, Emily, for the negative coverage that the president is getting?
So, no, actually, I think the reason that there's this backlash against the media is not necessarily because of the president. I think actually what he did was very much tap into the anger that he heard with the media. So he's reflecting the anger of the people in a way that I think when you look at the reason he was elected, and especially when we're looking throughout the heartland, what he did in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan, a lot of that is people just flat out saying, trade, immigration, all these things on his platform. You have to consider his attacks on the media part of his platform, because it's a huge reason why he was elected, because they see that all of these media outlets, these mainstream media outlets, fundamentally don't understand what they care about, which is jobs and trade. And Democrats right now in the party are training themselves to speak to these people. The media should learn something from what the Democrats are trying to pick up on right now, is that there's a lot of things people in the rest of the country outside of the Acela corridor want to hear, and it's not necessarily about tweeting.
A week ago today on this program, I ran a sort of a historical piece about FDR, and it's interesting that back then he'd been afflicted with polio since the age of 29, didn't really want to be portrayed as, weak or crippled, and the media helped him in that effort. He was rarely shown using his crutches or sitting in a wheelchair. He would be shown sitting down, but the media was absolutely fine with not displaying the President of the United States as a weakened figure. You go back to that Washington Post editorial that I just read from. He says that media coverage of the president has moved from adversarial to oppositional. Has it become that strong, Emily?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that in a lot of cases what we're seeing, especially what you see from journalists on Twitter, and that's why partially the New York Times is cracking down with their social media code for their reporters, you do see, especially with Donald Trump, I think what happened is that there was this anti-conservative bias. But what Donald Trump did was show through his, attacks on the media, he brought that into focus for a lot of people. It was already pre-existing. Real politically active conservatives had seen it for decades, and what Donald Trump did was bring it into focus. And interestingly, a year ago after he won, we saw this recognition wash over a lot of mainstream news outlets, including the New York Times, whose executive editor came out and sort of admitted to that. And so I think in a lot of ways we saw the media do this self-reflection, or say we're going to embark upon this self-reflection. He brought this to their attentions. He created some sense of awareness, but that does not necessarily mean that it's helped. And I don't think it has, sitting here a year later, that we've seen major improvement from the media.
But, Erin, no question the president relishes attacking the media and kind of enjoys the back and forth, does he not? Seems to.
Yeah, he seems to enjoy sparring, and it's not just with the media. We see this with fellow Republicans in Congress. We certainly see it with Democrats in Congress. The president relishes a fight because he thinks of himself as a winner and as a powerful figure. He promised in this campaign, it was his wife who said, if someone throws a punch, he'll punch back 10 times harder. And it's a winning line. When he tees himself up against the media, it's something that a lot of his supporters relish. And yes, he's called out fake news. His administration has called out alternative facts, but they are lumping together news stories that aren't true, as well as poll numbers he doesn't like and stories that are critical of him. If a reporter fact checks him and writes it into a story, he has lumped that under fake news. He's conflating all of those.
Well, here's one of the big media stories of the week, the Trump dossier. New reports out this week that Hillary Clinton's campaign helped fund it. I want to take a look at the timeline because some of the details can get lost. September of 2015, the New York Times says a Republican donor who didn't much like Donald Trump hired Fusion GPS to research him. In April of the following year, when Trump had pretty much won the nomination, the DNC and the Clinton campaign took over funding the project. In June of 2016, Fusion GPS hired the dossier author, Christopher Steele. He's a former British intelligence officer. That summer, the FBI begins its investigation into the Trump campaign's alleged ties to Russia. And then in October of 2016, just before the election, Mother Jones' David Korn publishes his so-called major scoop on the dossier, even though other media outlets had had it. And then in January of this year, former FBI Director James Comey briefs Trump on the dossier. Later that month, Vladimir Putin dismissed the dossier as false. President Trump suggests on October 19th that the FBI may have had a hand in creating that intelligence dossier. Kimberly Strassel was on America's Newsroom earlier, Erin, and says that there are a lot of shoes left to drop and that big bombshells are coming in this investigation. It seems that that's got to be the case.
You can look at it a couple of different ways. I mean, the most salacious claims in that Steele dossier were not verified, but a lot of claims in the dossier were verified by the intelligence community. We see the House and the Senate committees winding down some of their investigations here, but certainly Robert Mueller is not. We see him digging even deeper into Trump administration officials, into their travels, into their banking transactions. And that's going to be the breakthrough moment here when we find out what his team has been working on and what their findings are.
Well, and the question as to whether the FBI relied on any of this for some of the surveillance of Trump cam officials, Emily.
Yeah, and I think while we're talking about this was actually really excellent reporting from the Washington Post, and it's a good reminder that when there are serious stories, the mainstream media, of course, is still interested in covering them. I mean, this was a really substantive, serious story, and they did a great job reporting on it. I think another thing that we should be looking at in general is all of the other stories that have come out, whether it's with Uranium One or with the Podesta Group. There are a lot of stories here that go back to the campaign, that go back to a lot of people in very powerful positions working with foreign governments, and so this is a big story, and it's going to continue going for a long time.
Emily Jashinsky and Erin Delmore, thank you both.
Thank you.